Danny Cole walked down the empty street with his hands stuffed deep in his jacket pockets. The autumn wind cut through the thin fabric and made him shiver. He had just finished a 12-hour shift at the auto shop, and his body ached from bending over engines all day. The street lights above him flickered weakly and cast long shadows across the cracked sidewalk. He lived in a quiet part of Ohio where nothing interesting ever happened. The houses were old and the lawns were overgrown. Most of his neighbors were elderly people who went to bed before the sun went down. Danny liked the silence. It gave him time to think about his life and wonder if things would ever get better. He was 28 years old with no family and no real friends. His parents had died when he was young, and he had spent his childhood moving from one foster home to another. Nobody had ever wanted to keep him for long. He learned early that the only person he could rely on was himself. The black van appeared out of nowhere. One moment the street was empty, and the next moment the vehicle was right beside him. The side door slid open with a loud screech, and 3 men in ski masks jumped out. Danny tried to run, but they were too fast. Strong hands grabbed his arms and pulled him off his feet. He opened his mouth to scream, but someone shoved a cloth over his face. Everything went dark. When Danny woke up, his head was pounding, and his wrists were bound behind his back. A rough hood covered his face and blocked out all light. He could feel that he was sitting on a cold concrete floor with his back against a metal wall. The air smelled like rust and mold. He heard voices nearby. 2 men were arguing in hushed tones about money and timing, and something about a phone call. Danny stayed still and listened carefully. He needed to understand what was happening if he wanted to survive this. One of the men mentioned a name that Danny did not recognize. They talked about a wealthy businessman who lived on the other side of town. They mentioned a son who drove a blue car and worked late nights. Danny felt his stomach drop as he realized what had happened. These men had grabbed the wrong person. They thought he was someone else entirely. He tried to speak through the hood, but his voice came out weak and muffled. The talking stopped. Footsteps approached and someone pulled the hood off his head. Danny blinked in the dim light and saw a large man with a face staring down at him. Danny told them they had made a mistake. He was not the person they were looking for. He was just a mechanic who could barely pay his rent each month. He had no wealthy father and no family at all. There was nobody who would pay a ransom for him. The man laughed and called him a liar. He said that rich kids always tried to pretend they were poor when they got caught. He told Danny to save his breath because nobody was going to believe his story. They put the hood back on his head and left him alone in the darkness. Hours passed slowly. Danny worked at the ropes around his wrists until his skin was raw and bleeding. The knots were too tight and he could not get free. He thought about all the things he had never done and all the places he had never seen. He wondered if anyone would even notice when he disappeared. Sometime in the early morning hours, he heard strange sounds outside the building. There was a low humming noise that seemed to vibrate through the walls. Then came shouting and the sound of metal being torn apart like paper. Someone screamed in pain, and then everything went quiet. Danny held his breath and waited. Footsteps approached his door. They were light and quick, not like the heavy boots of his captors. The door burst open with a loud crash and bright light flooded into the room. A small figure stood in the doorway. Danny squinted against the light and tried to make sense of what he was seeing. The person was barely 1 meter tall with lavender-colored skin that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. Large golden eyes stared at him with an expression he could not read. Pointed ears poked through silver hair that was pulled back in a tight braid. She wore armor that shimmered like oil on water and changed colors as she moved. A glowing blue blade hung at her side, and strange symbols were etched into her gauntlets. She was clearly not human, and yet she moved toward him without hesitation or fear. Danny wanted to scream or run or do something, but his body refused to cooperate. He could only sit there and stare as this impossible creature knelt down beside him. She pulled out a small knife and cut through his bindings with a single smooth motion. She spoke in perfect English with a slight accent that he could not place. Her voice was soft, but carried an edge of authority that made him pay attention. She said that he was the one she had been searching for. Danny asked what she meant, but she did not answer. Instead, she helped him to his feet and guided him toward the door. His legs felt weak and unsteady after sitting for so long. She kept one hand on his arm to support him as they walked. The warehouse looked like a disaster zone. Walls had been torn open and equipment was scattered across the floor. The three kidnappers lay unconscious in a pile near the entrance. Their weapons were broken and their masks had been removed. They looked like ordinary men, scared and defeated. Outside in the parking lot, a silver vessel hovered silently above the ground. It was shaped like a teardrop and had no visible windows or doors. The surface was perfectly smooth and reflected the dim light of the stars above. The alien woman turned to face Danny. She told him her name was and that she came from a place called the Dominion. She said that she had traveled a very long way to find him and that she had many things to explain. Danny looked at the unconscious kidnappers and the destroyed warehouse and the impossible spaceship floating above him. He thought about his empty apartment and his dead-end job and his lonely life that seemed to stretch on forever without purpose. He asked what she wanted from him. She tilted her head and looked at him with those golden eyes that seemed to see right through him. She said that she wanted to offer him something that no human had ever been offered before. She wanted to offer him a place among the stars. Police sirens began to wail in the distance, glanced toward the sound and then back at Danny. She told him that he could stay here and explain everything to the authorities, or he could come with her and learn the truth. Danny did not know why he made the choice he did. Maybe it was curiosity or desperation, or simply the desire to escape a life that had never felt like his own. Whatever the reason, he took her hand and followed her into the ship. The door closed behind them, and the world he knew disappeared. The inside of the ship was nothing like Danny had expected. He had imagined cold metal walls and blinking lights like in the movies he used to watch as a child. Instead, he found himself in a warm space filled with soft colors and gentle curves. The walls seemed to breathe with a faint golden glow, and the floor felt like walking on thick carpet. Led him to a small room near the center of the vessel. There was a curved bench against one wall and a table that seemed to grow directly from the floor. She gestured for him to sit down, and he did so without argument. His legs were still shaking, and his mind was struggling to process everything that had happened. She moved to a panel on the wall and pressed several symbols that Danny did not recognize. The room hummed quietly, and he felt a strange sensation in his stomach. Through a window that appeared in the wall, he watched the earth grow smaller beneath them. The lights of cities sparkled like scattered jewels against the darkness of the night. Danny had never been afraid of heights, but this was different. He was looking at his entire planet from above, and it made him feel incredibly small. Everything he had ever known was down there, and he had just left it all behind to follow a stranger into the unknown. Sat down across from him and studied his face with those large golden eyes. She seemed to be waiting for him to speak first, but he did not know what to say. There were too many questions fighting for space in his head. She broke the silence by offering him food and water. She assured him that everything was safe for human consumption, because her people had studied Earth biology for centuries. Danny accepted the water and drank deeply. His throat was dry from hours of breathing through that dusty hood. She began to explain her purpose in coming to Earth. Her species was called and they came from a world that orbited a distant star. They were a proud warrior race with a history that stretched back thousands of years before humans had even learned to walk upright. But her people were dying. A genetic condition had spread through their population over many generations. It affected the females more severely than the males, and made it increasingly difficult for them to produce healthy offspring. Their numbers had been declining for centuries, and they had tried everything to stop it. The solution came from an unexpected source. Their scientists discovered that certain other species in the galaxy shared genetic markers with the. These species could produce viable offspring with females. Humans were one of only 3 known compatible species. Danny listened in stunned silence as she continued. They had been observing Earth for a long time and had identified individuals whose genetic profiles made them ideal partners. Danny was one of those individuals. His bloodline carried rare markers that their scientists found especially promising. He interrupted her to ask a question that had been burning in his mind. He wanted to know why she had saved him from the kidnappers if her only interest was in using him for breeding purposes. His voice came out harsher than he intended, but he did not apologize. His expression shifted, and she looked almost offended by his words. She told him that they did not take unwilling partners. Their laws forbade such actions, and any warrior who violated those laws would face severe punishment. She had intended to approach him properly and make her intentions known through honorable means. But then she had detected his distress signal. Every human with their target genetic markers was monitored by satellite from orbit. When the kidnappers took Danny, she had tracked his location and moved to intercept. She could not allow a potential mate to be harmed when she had the power to prevent it. Danny asked what would have happened if he had not been kidnapped, said that she would have found a way to meet him naturally. She would have explained her situation and made her proposal. She would have given him time to consider and respected whatever choice he made. The word proposal caught his attention. He asked her to explain what exactly she was proposing. Stood up and walked to the window. Earth was just a blue and white ball now hanging in the endless black of space. She spoke without looking at him, and her voice was softer than before. Among the female must prove her worth before she could propose to a potential mate. This tradition dated back to the earliest days of their civilization, when resources were scarce, and every partnership had to benefit the community. A female had to demonstrate that she could protect and provide for her chosen partner. By rescuing Danny from his captors had fulfilled this requirement. She had proven that she was capable of keeping him safe from harm. Now she had earned the right to offer him a formal proposal of partnership. Danny felt dizzy, and it had nothing to do with being in space. He asked what would happen if he refused her proposal. Turned to face him again. She said that if he refused, she would return him to Earth and never contact him again. The valued choice above all other things. A partnership built on coercion was worthless in their eyes. She would be disappointed, but she would accept his decision and move on. She asked him to consider her offer before making his final choice. She showed him images of her through the ship's display system. He saw vast purple oceans and cities that floated among the clouds. He saw forests of crystalline trees and mountains that glowed with inner light. It was beautiful in a way that made his chest ache. She told him that as her partner he would be honored among her people. He would have a place and a purpose, and a family that would protect him for the rest of his life. They treasured their partners because each one represented hope for their species. Danny admitted that his life on Earth was not worth much. He had no one waiting for him and nothing to look forward to. But he was not ready to abandon his entire world based on the words of someone he had just met. He needed time to think. Nodded as if she had expected this response. She proposed a compromise. She would remain on Earth with him for 1 month. During that time, they would get to know each other, and he would have the chance to learn more about her and her people. At the end of the month, he could make his final decision. If he chose to refuse, she would leave, and he would never see her again. If he chose to accept, she would take him to her and begin the next chapter of their lives together. Danny looked at this small alien woman who had torn through his kidnappers like they were children. He looked at the vast universe stretching out beyond the window. He thought about the empty apartment waiting for him back on Earth. He agreed to the trial period, smiled for the first time since they had met. It transformed her face and made her look almost human despite her lavender skin and golden eyes. She activated the ship's controls and they began their descent back to Earth. Their month together was about to begin. The first week was difficult in ways that Danny had not anticipated. Landed her ship in a dense forest several miles outside of town, and activated a cloaking device that made it invisible to both sight and sensors. She then produced a small device that she pressed against her neck. Before his eyes, her appearance shifted and changed until she looked like a short human woman with pale skin and dark hair. The disguise was impressive but not perfect. She was still only 1 meter tall, and her movements were too precise and too quick to pass for normal. Her eyes remained an unusual shade of amber that drew attention wherever they went, and she spoke in a formal manner that made people stare. Danny brought her back to his apartment and immediately realized how small and shabby it must look to someone who lived among floating cities, but said nothing negative about his home. She examined everything with genuine curiosity and asked questions about objects that he took for granted. She wanted to know how the refrigerator worked and why he had so many different shoes and what purpose the television served. He tried to explain human customs, but found that many of them did not make sense when he put them into words. Why did people say fine when someone asked how they were even if they were not fine? Why did humans eat food that tasted good but provided no nutrition? Why did they spend so much time watching fictional stories about people who did not exist? Listened to his explanations without judgment. She admitted that they had their own strange customs that outsiders found confusing. Every species developed traditions that made sense within their own context but seemed bizarre to others. Danny needed to return to work or he would lose his job and his apartment. He worried about leaving alone, but she assured him that she could take care of herself. She had survived battles against creatures that would make his kidnappers look like harmless children. A few hours alone in a human town would not be a challenge. He introduced her to his cousin from a small country overseas. They accepted the explanation, though they found her height and manner of speaking unusual. His boss made a few jokes about her size that Danny did not find funny, seemed unbothered by the comments, and simply smiled politely. She showed unexpected interest in his work. She asked him to explain how combustion engines functioned and why humans still relied on such primitive technology for transportation. Danny found himself enjoying the chance to teach someone about the one thing he was actually good at. He showed her how to change oil and replace brake pads and diagnose problems by listening to the sounds an engine made. Learned quickly. Her hands were small but incredibly precise, and she never forgot anything he told her. By the end of the first week, she could perform basic maintenance tasks better than some of the mechanics who had been working at the shop for years. In the evenings, they shared meals and talked about their lives. Danny cooked simple food because that was all he knew how to make. Ate everything without complaint, though he suspected that human cuisine was very different from what she was used to. She told him stories about her training as a warrior. They began combat education at a young age and continued until they reached adulthood. She had fought in several conflicts against hostile species who threatened her people's territory. She had lost friends and comrades in those battles and carried their memories with her always. Danny shared his own history, though it felt insignificant compared to hers. He told her about losing his parents and growing up without a real home. He told her about the foster families who took him in for a few months before sending him away again. He told her about the loneliness that had followed him his entire life like a shadow he could never escape. Listened without interrupting. When he finished, she told him that she understood loneliness better than he might think. She was the youngest daughter of a minor house with no particular status or influence. She had earned everything she had through her own efforts while others looked down on her for her humble origins. They discovered unexpected common ground in their conversations. Both knew what it meant to be underestimated because of how they looked. Both understood the weight of feeling like they did not belong anywhere. Both had spent years building walls around themselves to keep from being hurt. As the days passed, Danny found himself looking forward to coming home from work. He found himself thinking about during his shifts and wondering what she was doing. He found himself noticing small things about her that he had missed before. The way she tilted her head when she was thinking. The way her eyes lit up when she learned something new. The way she moved through the world with quiet confidence despite being smaller than everyone around her. One night during the third week, they were walking back from a convenience store when four men stepped out of an alley. They demanded money and threatened violence if Danny did not comply. He reached for his wallet but stepped forward before he could react. She moved so fast that Danny could barely track her movements. In less than 3 seconds, all four men were on the ground. One was clutching his wrist and whimpering. Another was gasping for breath after being struck in the stomach. The other two were simply unconscious. Looked at them with an expression of mild annoyance like they were insects that had interrupted her evening walk. She turned to Danny and asked if he was unharmed. He nodded slowly and stared at the scene before him. She took his hand and led him away from the groaning attackers. She told him that she would always protect him no matter what. It was not just her duty as a potential partner. It was something she wanted to do because she had come to care about him. Danny did not know what to say. He was not used to anyone caring about him. He was not used to feeling safe with another person. He was not used to any of this. They walked home in silence, but Danny kept holding her hand. Her fingers were small and warm and fit perfectly between his own. With 1 week left in their agreement, he realized that he had already made his decision. He just needed to find the right words to tell her. The final week felt different from the ones that came before. Danny woke up each morning with a strange mixture of excitement and fear churning in his stomach. He knew that time was running out, and that soon he would have to speak the words that would change his life forever. Seemed to sense the shift in his mood. She gave him space when he needed it and stayed close when he wanted company. She never pressured him to make a decision or asked what he was thinking. She simply continued being herself and let him work through his feelings at his own pace. Danny found himself paying attention to things he had ignored for years. He noticed the way the autumn leaves caught the sunlight as they fell from the trees. He noticed the sound of children laughing in the park across the street. He noticed the smell of coffee brewing in the shop next to his apartment building. He was saying goodbye to his world without realizing it. At work, he commented that he seemed different lately. Said he looked like a man who had finally found something worth caring about. Danny did not know how to respond, so he just smiled and went back to the engine he was repairing. Spent her days exploring the town and learning about human society. She visited the library and read books about Earth history and culture. She watched people in cafes and parks and tried to understand the patterns of their behavior. She told Danny that humans were fascinating creatures full of contradictions and surprises. She said that most species in the galaxy followed predictable patterns. They valued strength or intelligence or resources and built their societies around those things. But humans were different. They valued things that made no logical sense. They sacrificed themselves for strangers. They created art that served no practical purpose. They loved deeply and irrationally even when it caused them pain. Danny asked if she thought those things were weaknesses, shook her head, and said they were the opposite. She said that they had studied many species and found that humans possessed something rare and precious. They had the ability to hope even when hope seemed foolish. They had the capacity to change and grow in ways that other species could not. She told him that her people had once been like humans. Long ago, before the genetic decline began, they had been dreamers and builders and lovers. But centuries of struggle had hardened them. They had become focused on survival and forgotten how to live. Meeting humans had reminded them of what they had lost. It was one of the reasons they valued human partners so highly. not just for their genetic compatibility, but for the qualities they brought to society. Human partners helped the remember how to feel. Danny thought about her words for a long time. He had spent his whole life feeling like he had nothing to offer anyone. He was not smart or strong or successful. He had no special talents or achievements. He was just an ordinary man living an ordinary life. But saw something in him that he could not see in himself. She saw value in the very things he had considered worthless. His ability to keep going despite everything. His kindness toward people who had never been kind to him. His stubborn refusal to become bitter even when life gave him every reason to. On the last night of their agreement, Danny asked to come to the roof of his apartment building. The nights had grown cold, and they both wore heavy jackets as they climbed the narrow stairs. The city stretched out below them with its lights and sounds and endless activity. Danny looked up at the stars that dotted the dark sky. He thought about how different they must look from us. He wondered if he would ever get used to an alien sky, or if he would always miss the constellations he had known since childhood. Stood beside him in silence. She did not ask any questions or make any demands. She simply waited with the patience of someone who had learned long ago that some things could not be rushed. Danny told her that the past month had changed him in ways he was still trying to understand. He had entered their agreement expecting to feel used or manipulated. He had been waiting for her to reveal some hidden agenda or cruel intention, but she had been exactly what she claimed to be from the very beginning. He said that he was terrified of leaving Earth. He had lived here his entire life, and it was the only home he had ever known, but he was even more terrified of staying. He was scared of going back to his empty apartment and his meaningless job and his lonely existence that stretched on forever without purpose. He told her that for the first time in his life, he felt like he mattered to someone. He felt like he had a place in the universe that was made specifically for him. He felt like he belonged. Turned to look at him, and her golden eyes reflected the city lights below. She asked if he understood what accepting her proposal would mean. If he agreed, he would be bound to her by law. She would be responsible for his safety and happiness and his place in her society. She did not take that responsibility lightly. Danny asked her a question that had been weighing on his mind. He wanted to know if she actually wanted him, or if she was just fulfilling her duty to her species. He needed to know if this was real or just an arrangement of convenience. Was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer than he had ever heard it. She told him that she had observed many humans before choosing him. She could have selected someone wealthy or powerful or famous. She could have chosen someone who would bring status and influence to her house. Instead, she had chosen a mechanic from Ohio who lived alone in a small apartment. She chose him because of what she saw when she watched him from orbit. She saw how he treated the elderly woman who lived next door. She saw how he helped stranded motorists without expecting anything in return. She saw how he fed stray cats behind his building, even though he could barely afford to feed himself. She saw kindness without expectation of reward. She saw strength that had nothing to do with muscles or weapons. She saw a good man in a universe that often seemed to have too few of them. She told him that she hoped their partnership would produce children who carried on both their lineages. But even if it did not, she would not regret choosing him. She wanted him not because of what he could give her, but because of who he was. Danny felt tears prickling at the corners of his eyes. He had not cried since he was a child, and he was not sure why he was crying now. Maybe it was relief or joy or simply the release of years of loneliness that he had carried alone for so long. He reached out and took her small hand in his. The answer was yes. Stared at him with wide golden eyes that shimmered in the starlight. She asked him to say it again because she wanted to be certain she had heard correctly. Danny smiled through his tears and said the word once more. Yes. For a moment she stood completely still like a statue carved from lavender stone. Then something shifted in her expression, and she looked almost vulnerable. She asked if he was sure about this decision. She reminded him that once he left Earth, he might never return. She wanted him to understand the weight of what he was choosing. Danny laughed softly and told her that he had never been sure of anything in his entire life. Every choice he had ever made had felt like a gamble. But this time, the gamble felt different. This time he was betting on something that actually mattered. He squeezed her hand and told her that he wanted to find out what happened next. He wanted to see her world and meet her people and build a life with her among the stars. He wanted to stop being alone. Lifted their joined hands and pressed them against her chest. He could feel her heart beating rapidly beneath the armor she still wore. She told him that among this gesture sealed a bond between partners. It meant that their lives were now connected in ways that went beyond words or promises. She released his hand and pulled a small device from her belt. She spoke rapidly in a language that sounded like music mixed with thunder. Danny could not understand the words, but he recognized the tone of someone delivering important news. Told him that a larger vessel would arrive within the hour to collect them. Her scout ship was not designed for long-distance travel, and the journey to her would take several weeks. They would be traveling on a cruiser with others who were returning from various missions across the galaxy. Danny asked what would happen when they arrived, explained that there would be ceremonies and introductions and many complicated rituals that she would help him navigate. Her family would want to meet him and assess his worthiness. Her society would want to observe the human who had agreed to join them. She warned him that not everyone would welcome him with open arms. Some still viewed humans as primitive creatures unworthy of partnership. Others resented the need to seek mates from other species and blamed outsiders for their genetic troubles. Danny would face challenges and prejudice that might be difficult to bear. But she would be beside him every step of the way. She would defend him against anyone who tried to harm him. She would teach him their language and customs and help him find his place. She would be his partner in every sense of the word. Danny nodded and said he understood. He had faced prejudice before. He had been the outsider before. He knew how to survive in a world that did not want him. The difference this time was that he would not be facing it alone. They descended from the roof and returned to his apartment. Danny looked around at the small space that had been his home for the past 3 years. The worn furniture and faded walls and cluttered shelves full of things he had collected over a lifetime. None of it seemed important anymore. Asked if there was anything he wanted to bring with him, Danny thought about the question carefully. He did not own anything of real value. No family heirlooms or precious keepsakes, just the ordinary possessions of an ordinary man. He walked to his bedroom and opened the drawer of his nightstand. Inside was a photograph in a cheap plastic frame. It showed a young couple holding a baby between them. The woman had Danny's eyes and the man had his smile. It was the only picture he had of his parents. He tucked the photograph into his jacket and told he was ready. They walked together through the quiet streets of the town where Danny had spent so many years, the convenience store where he bought his groceries, the park where he sometimes sat and watched the children play, the auto shop where he had spent countless hours working on engines that belonged to strangers. He said goodbye to all of it in his mind. He thanked the town for giving him a place to exist even if it had never truly felt like home. He hoped that whoever moved into his apartment next would find more happiness there than he had. The forest was dark and silent when they reached the clearing where had hidden her ship. She deactivated the cloaking device, and the silver vessel appeared like a ghost materializing from thin air. But they did not board it. Instead, they waited in the cold night air until a much larger ship descended from the clouds above. It was shaped like a crescent moon and covered with patterns that glowed softly blue. The vessel made no sound as it lowered itself toward the ground. A door opened in the side of the ship, and a ramp extended down to the grass. Warm light spilled out from within, and Danny could see figures moving in the corridor beyond. took his hand and led him toward the entrance. As they walked up the ramp, Danny felt a strange sensation wash over him. It was not fear or excitement or sadness. It was something he had never felt before. It took him a moment to recognize it for what it was. It was hope. Inside the ship, several waited to greet them. They were all different heights and builds, but they shared the same lavender skin and pointed ears as. Some of them looked at Danny with curiosity. Others looked at him with suspicion. One or two looked at him with something that might have been hostility. Spoke to them in her native language, and they responded with words and gestures that Danny could not interpret. But he noticed that they treated her with respect. Whatever her status had been before, she had clearly earned their regard through her actions. She led him through the corridors of the ship to a small cabin that would be their quarters during the journey. The room was simple but comfortable, with a bed and a table and a window that looked out at the stars. Danny walked to the window and pressed his hand against the cool surface. Below them, the earth hung in the darkness like a blue and white jewel. He could see the outline of continents he had only ever seen on maps. He could see the thin line of atmosphere that protected everything he had ever known. Stood beside him and watched as their home planet grew smaller in the distance. She asked him how he was feeling. Danny thought about the question for a long time. He thought about the life he was leaving behind and the life that waited for him ahead. He thought about all the uncertainty and danger and difficulty that lay in his future. He thought about the small alien woman standing beside him who had turned his world upside down. He told her that he was terrified, but he was also excited. And underneath both of those feelings was something warm and steady that he had not felt since he was a child. He felt like he was finally going home. Smiled and leaned against his side. She told him that home was not a place. It was a feeling you carried inside yourself. It was the knowledge that you belonged somewhere with someone who wanted you there. She told him that he was her home now, and she hoped that someday she would be his. Danny put his arm around her shoulders and pulled her close. Together, they watched the stars drift past the window as the ship carried them toward a future neither of them could predict. He did not know what waited for them on her world. He did not know if he would find happiness or hardship or some combination of both. But for the first time in his life, he was not facing the unknown alone. That was enough. That was everything.